The air in Albany, New York, crackled with tension thicker than the humid summer haze clinging to the state capitol. Thundering footsteps echoed down the marble halls as journalists swarmed their cameras, flashing like lightning in a storm. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known to the world as AOC, stood at the heart of it all, her hands gripping the podium so tightly, her knuckles whitened. Just hours earlier, news had broken that the New York State Senate had passed the first stage of a redistricting map, a plan that carved up her 14th congressional district and threatened to erase her seat entirely. The map wasn't final, more stages loomed, but the blow was already seismic, shaking the foundations of her political world. AOC's eyes blazed as she faced the wall of reporters, her voice sharp, trembling with barely contained fury. "This isn't just politics," she declared, her words slicing through the crowded room. "This is a calculated attack, and I'm calling it out right now. Senator John Neely Kennedy from Louisiana is behind this. He's pulling strings to silence me because I speak truth to power every single day." Gasps rippled through the press corps. Microphones clicked, capturing every syllable. AOC wasn't done. Kennedy thinks he can manipulate democracy to protect his party's grip on power. She continued, her voice rising. "He's targeting me because I challenge the status quo, because I fight for working people. This is about rigging the midterms, and I won't stand for it." The room buzzed with energy reporters scribbling furiously, live feeds streaming her words across the nation. She leaned forward, her stare defiant. "Kennedy and his allies will stop at nothing to crush voices like mine, but I'm not going anywhere." Her accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap, bold and unapologetic. But AOC had no idea she'd just lit a fuse that would spark a firestorm she couldn't control. Across the country in Washington, D.C., Senator John Neely Kennedy sat in his office, surrounded by aides poring over legislative briefs. The senior senator from Louisiana, known for his sharp wit and unwavering commitment to his constituents, paused mid-sentence as an aide handed him a tablet. "Senator, you need to see this," the aide said, urgency in her voice. On the screen, AOC's press conference played in real time, her accusations against Kennedy streaming live. He watched, his expression calm, almost amused, as her voice dripped with indignation. "She's blaming me for New York's redistricting," Kennedy asked, his southern drawl steady, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "The map's barely through its first stage, and I'm a senator from Louisiana, not New York." He handed the tablet back, his eyes gleaming with quiet resolve. "That's interesting." The cameras were still rolling at a Senate press briefing when Kennedy stepped to the podium later that day. The reporters, sensing blood in the water, leaned in as he adjusted his glasses. "So Representative Ocasio-Cortez says I'm the mastermind behind New York's redistricting." Kennedy began, his tone measured but carrying a razor's edge. "Folks, if I had that kind of power over New York politics, I'd be flattered. But let's be clear, people who point fingers like that usually have something they're trying to hide." The room went silent, the weight of his words settling over the crowd. "She's built a career shouting my name and others to stay in the spotlight. But when you live by headlines, you better be ready for the truth to write the next one." His voice carried no malice, only the steady conviction of a man who'd seen political storms come and go. The reporters erupted with questions, but Kennedy raised a hand. "The truth will speak for itself," he said, then stepped away, leaving the press scrambling. Within hours, Kennedy's response was everywhere. Cable news replayed his words, social media buzzed, and the phrase, "truth will speak," began trending nationwide. In New York, AOC paced her campaign office, her phone vibrating with notifications. Her staff huddled in a corner, whispering about damage control. She went too far, one aide muttered, glancing nervously at AOC. Kennedy's not the type to let this slide. AOC ignored them, her mind racing. She'd thrown down the gauntlet, but Kennedy's calm, cutting reply had shifted the ground beneath her. What did he mean by something to hide? The question gnawed at her stirring memories of late-night strategy calls, donor meetings, and offhand comments she'd made in private. Her chest tightened as she scrolled through Twitter, where hashtags like #AOC calls out Kennedy were already being drowned out by #Truth Will Speak. Back in Washington, Kennedy returned to his office unfazed by the media frenzy. He sat at his desk reviewing a stack of constituent letters, his focus on the people of Louisiana. "This isn't about me," he told an aide quietly. "It's about what's right for the country. If she wants to make it personal, that's her choice. The facts will do the talking." His team nodded, knowing Kennedy's reputation for letting evidence, not emotions, lead the way. They'd seen him weather attacks before, always emerging stronger by sticking to principle over drama. But the political world was watching, and the stakes were climbing. By evening, newsrooms were abuzz with speculation. What did Kennedy know? Was there more to AOC's outburst than met the eye? Pundits on every channel dissected the exchange, some praising Kennedy's restraint, others wondering if AOC had miscalculated her target. In New York, the state capitol was a hive of activity. Aides to senior Democrats whispered in hallways, their faces grim. "If Kennedy's got something, she's in trouble," one said, glancing over his shoulder. "He doesn't bluff." Another nodded, clutching a coffee cup. She picked the wrong fight. AOC's team, meanwhile, scrambled to craft a follow-up statement, but the damage was done. Her accusation had lit up the internet, but Kennedy's response was stealing the narrative. Social media platform buzzed with memes and hot takes, some mocking AOC's fiery speech, others amplifying Kennedy's cool-headed comeback. A single tweet from a prominent political account summed it up. AOC threw a punch, but Kennedy's got the counter. This is about to get wild. As night fell, AOC sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering outside her window. Her phone glowed with messages, some from supporters urging her to double down, others from allies warning her to back off. Her father, a quiet but influential figure in her life, had left a voicemail earlier that day. Alexandria. His voice was steady but heavy. "Anger doesn't win hearts. Truth does. Be careful what you're fighting for." She hadn't called him back yet, but his words echoed in her mind, clashing with the fire still burning in her chest. She thought of Kennedy's parting shot at the press briefing, the way he'd smiled calm as a summer lake, while hinting at something bigger. What was he holding back? The question kept her awake, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. In Washington, Kennedy was wrapping up a late meeting with colleagues discussing infrastructure funding for Louisiana. The redistricting drama was a distant hum to him, a distraction from the work that mattered. But his aides were already fielding calls from journalists hungry for the next chapter. "When will the senator elaborate?" one reporter demanded. An aide smiled politely. "When the time's right," she replied, echoing Kennedy's own words. The clock was ticking, and every moment felt heavier now. AOC knew that if Kennedy spoke again, it could shift the tide entirely. She just didn't know how fast that moment was coming. The next morning, the political talk shows were in overdrive, dissecting the clash between AOC and Kennedy. Clips of her press conference played side by side with Kennedy's response, the contrast stark. Her passion was electric but frantic. His restraint was steady, almost surgical. Online hashtags like #TruthWillSpeak and #AOCVs Kennedy dominated the conversation. Some praised AOC's boldness, but others questioned her judgment. Why go after Kennedy? One commenter wrote, "He's not even in New York politics." Another posted, "She's got fire, but Kennedy's got facts. This won't end well for her." The public was hooked, sensing a bigger story brewing beneath the surface. By midday, a small but significant development broke. A local New York outlet received an anonymous tip, a single document, hinting at questionable campaign spending tied to AOC's team. It wasn't much, just a breadcrumb, but it was enough to send reporters digging. The news spread like wildfire, and whispers of scandal began to creep into the headlines. AOC's office was flooded with calls, but she stayed silent, her team issuing a vague statement about politically motivated attacks. Kennedy, meanwhile, was spotted at a community event in Louisiana, shaking hands with voters, his focus unwavering. When a reporter shouted a question about AOC, he paused, his eyes twinkling with that trademark wit. "I'm here for the people of Louisiana," he said simply. "The rest will sort itself out." The day wore on, and the pressure on AOC mounted. Her accusation had been bold, but Kennedy's response had shifted the narrative in a way she hadn't anticipated. Every news cycle brought new questions, new doubts. Her supporters rallied online, but cracks were forming. Some began to wonder if she'd misjudged her opponent. Kennedy wasn't just another politician, he was a seasoned strategist known for letting the truth do the heavy lifting. And the truth, it seemed, was starting to stir. In her apartment, AOC stared at her phone, the anonymous tip now trending across social media. Her father's voicemail played again in her mind, his words a quiet warning. She felt the walls closing in the weight of her own words pressing down. Kennedy had opened a door, and something was about to walk through it. The streets of New York buzzed with restless energy, the kind that hums when a city senses a scandal brewing. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as the headlines called her, felt the weight of it all from her campaign office in Queens. The redistricting map that threatened her seat in New York's 14th congressional district was still just a proposal. Its first stage barely passed, but the political tremors were already shaking her foundation. Her fiery accusation against Senator John Neely Kennedy had ignited a firestorm, and now the flames were licking closer. She'd pointed the finger at Kennedy, calling him the mastermind behind a plot to erase her district. But his calm, cutting response had shifted the spotlight back onto her. Social media was ablaze with #TruthWillSpeak, and AOC's inbox overflowed with messages, some from loyal supporters, others from skeptics smelling blood. She paced the room, her sneakers scuffing the worn carpet, as her team debated how to counter Kennedy's cryptic warning that she was hiding something. Outside, the media frenzy grew louder. News vans lined the block, their antennas jutting into the gray sky like spears. A local reporter had just broken a story about an anonymous tip, a leaked document suggesting irregularities in AOC's campaign spending. It wasn't definitive, just a single page of numbers hinting at funds marked for community outreach that didn't quite add up. But it was enough to send journalists into a feeding frenzy digging for more. Cable news ran the story on a loop, with pundits speculating wildly. Is this what Kennedy was hinting at? One anchor asked, her voice dripping with intrigue. Does AOC have something to hide? The question hung in the air unanswered, but heavy as Twitter lit up with hashtags like #AOScandal and Follow the Money. AOC's team scrambled to draft a response, but she waved them off. This is a distraction, she snapped, her voice sharp, but tinged with unease. Kennedy's playing dirty, and we're not falling for it. In Washington, Senator John Neely Kennedy was far from the chaos meeting with Louisiana farmers to discuss flood relief. His office was a hub of quiet efficiency aides sorting through constituent mail, while he listened intently to a weathered man in overalls describe crop losses. Kennedy's focus never wavered, his questions precise, his demeanor warm but grounded. When an aide slipped him a note about the New York leak, he glanced at it briefly, his lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. "Folks will find out what they need to," he said softly, handing the note back. "Let's keep our eyes on what matters." His team knew that tone. It was the same one he used when navigating political storms, always choosing principle over posturing. Kennedy hadn't started this fight, but he wasn't about to let AOC's accusations go unanswered, not with words, but with the truth. By evening, the anonymous tip had grown legs. A second leak hit the internet, a grainy video clip from a private fundraiser uploaded to a small but influential political blog. In it, AOC stood at a podium, her voice confident, almost playful. "Look, every time I call out Kennedy or his crowd, the donations roll in," she said, a smirk flashing across her face. "It's good branding. People love a fighter, and I'm giving them one." The room in the video erupted in laughter, donors clapping as AOC raised a glass. The clip was short, just 20 seconds, but it spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was on every major news network, dissected by commentators who couldn't hide their shock. "This paints a very different picture of AOC's motives," one analyst said, frowning at the camera. "Is she fighting for principle, or is this about building a brand?" The backlash was swift. Even some of her staunchest supporters online hesitated, their tweets less defiant, their loyalty wavering. AOC watched the clip in her office, her jaw tight, her fingers gripping her phone. "They're taking it out of context," she muttered, but the words felt hollow even to her. She remembered that night, the fundraiser packed with wealthy donors, the wine flowing, the room buzzing with energy. It had felt like a victory lap, a moment of camaraderie. Now it was a noose tightening around her campaign. Her team huddled around a conference table, their faces grim. "We need to get ahead of this," one aide urged, scribbling notes. "Say it was a joke, or edited." AOC shook her head, her eyes distant. "They'll just find more," she said quietly. She thought of Kennedy's press briefing, his calm assurance that the truth would speak for itself. What else was out there? The question gnawed at her, a splinter she couldn't pull out. In her childhood home in the Bronx, AOC's father sat at the kitchen table watching the news with a heavy heart. A community organizer who'd always preached integrity, he'd raised his daughter to fight for justice, not headlines. He picked up his phone and called her, his voice steady but firm. "Alexandria, you need to stop and think," he said when she answered. "You can't keep pointing fingers when the mirror's staring right at you." AOC listened, her throat tight, but didn't respond. She hung up the silence in her office louder than the city outside. Her father's words echoed a quiet warning that cut deeper than the media's noise. She'd always seen him as her moral compass. But now she felt adrift, caught between pride and the growing weight of her choices. Back in Washington, Kennedy was preparing for a Senate vote, his focus on policy as always. But the press wouldn't let the story go. At a Capitol Hill press gaggle, reporters swarmed him, shouting questions about the leaked video. Kennedy paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "I'm not here to pile on," he said, his voice steady as ever. "But when someone builds their career on calling out others, they'd better make sure their own house is clean." The reporters scribbled furiously, sensing there was more to come. Kennedy didn't linger. He had work to do. But his words landed like a pebble in a pond, rippling across newsrooms and social media. Pundits praised his restraint, noting how he avoided personal attacks while letting the evidence do the talking. "That's Kennedy's style," one commentator said on air. "He doesn't need to shout. He just waits for the truth to catch up." The next morning, the story took a darker turn. A major New York newspaper received a USB drive no-return address labeled simply for the public. Inside was a trove of documents, bank statements, email exchanges, and meeting notes tied to AOC's campaign. The files suggested that funds meant for community programs had been redirected to high-end events, travel expenses, and even personal purchases. The numbers weren't fully verified, but they were detailed enough to raise eyebrows. The paper's investigative team went to work cross-referencing dates and transactions. By midday, they published a cautious but damning report. Questions surround Ocasio-Cortez campaign spending. The story exploded, trending alongside hashtags like #AOC exposed and #Kennedy was right. News anchors read the headlines with grave tones, and even neutral outlets began asking hard questions. If these documents are real, one reporter said this could be devastating for her. AOC's office was a war zone, phones ringing off the hook, aides shouting over each other. She sat at her desk staring at the news on her laptop, her hands trembling. "This is a setup," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She thought back to late-night meetings, casual promises to donors, and offhand decisions she'd brushed off as harmless. Had someone been watching, recording her team, urged her to issue a statement, but every draft felt like a trap. Deny the allegations and risk more leaks. Admit fault, and her career might crumble. She glanced at a framed photo on her desk, her with her father at a community rally years ago, both smiling, full of hope. The memory stung. She picked up her phone and listened to his voicemail again. His words, a quiet plea, to choose truth over pride. In Louisiana, Kennedy was at a town hall listening to a single mother describe her struggle to afford childcare. He nodded, taking notes, his attention fully on her. When a reporter interrupted to ask about AOC, Kennedy's expression didn't change. "I'm focused on the people right here," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "The rest is just noise until the facts come out." The audience applauded, their trust in him palpable. Kennedy's reputation as a straight shooter, a senator who put his state first, was unshaken. He didn't need to gloat or grandstand. His silence was louder than AOC's accusations. But the press sensed he knew more than he was saying. "What's next?" a journalist whispered to a colleague. "If Kennedy's got something else, she's done." As night fell, AOC sat alone in her apartment, the city's hum a distant murmur. Her phone buzzed with messages, but she ignored them. The leaked video played in her mind, her own voice mocking her. "It's good branding," she'd said, laughing. Now that laughter felt like a ghost haunting her. She thought of Kennedy, his steady gaze, his refusal to take the bait. He wasn't fighting her with words, he was letting the truth do the work. And the truth was closing in. Social media was relentless, with posts dissecting her every move. Even her supporters were quieter now, some unfollowing, others asking questions she couldn't answer. Her father's voicemail played again in her head, a lifeline she wasn't ready to grab. The clock ticked louder, and AOC knew the next leak could change everything. She just didn't know how soon it would come. The morning sun barely pierced the gray clouds hanging over New York City, but the streets outside Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's campaign office in Queens pulsed with a restless energy. Reporters camped out on the sidewalk, their cameras trained on the door, like hawks waiting for prey. Inside, AOC sat at a cluttered desk, her eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. The redistricting map, threatening her 14th congressional district seat, was still in its early stages, but the political fallout from her accusations against Senator John Neely Kennedy had spiraled into a full-blown crisis. The leaked video of her laughing about using attacks on Kennedy to boost donations had gone viral, and now a second wave of documents, bank statements, and emails hinting at misused campaign funds, had set social media ablaze with hashtags like AOC exposed and follow the money. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, a mix of frantic messages from aides and cautious texts from allies pulling back. The air felt suffocating, each headline tightening the noose around her career. AOC's team huddled in a corner of the office, their voices low but urgent. "We need to respond now," one aide insisted, waving a draft statement. "Say the documents are forged or at least unverified." Another shook her head. "If we deny it, and more comes out, we're done." AOC barely listened, her gaze fixed on a TV screen playing a news loop. A pundit was dissecting the latest leak, a receipt showing campaign funds spent on a luxury hotel suite during a community outreach trip. "This doesn't look good for Representative Ocasio-Cortez," the anchor said, her tone grave. "The public deserves answers." AOC's stomach churned. She remembered the trip, the late-night meetings with donors, the casual decisions she'd waved off as no big deal. Now, those choices were being broadcast to the world, each one a crack in her carefully built image. In Washington, Senator John Neely Kennedy was far from the chaos, speaking at a community center in Baton Rouge. The room was packed with Louisiana residents, their faces a mix of hope and hardship, as they listened to Kennedy outline plans for job training programs. His voice, warm with that familiar Southern drawl, carried a quiet strength that put the crowd at ease. When a reporter slipped through the back and shouted a question about AOC, Kennedy didn't flinch. "I'm here for the people of Louisiana," he said, his eyes steady. "The truth is coming out in New York, and it doesn't need my help to do it." The crowd clapped their trust in him, unshaken. Kennedy's aides exchanged glances, knowing his restraint was deliberate. He didn't need to throw punches. His focus on service and integrity was louder than any attack AOC could muster. Back in New York, the pressure on AOC was unbearable. Her accusation against Kennedy had backfired, turning her into the story instead of him. The latest leak had sparked a firestorm online, with even some of her most loyal supporters questioning her motives. A tweet from a prominent activist read, "I love AOC's passion, but this fundraising stuff looks bad. We need the truth." Her office phone rang, non-stop reporters demanding a statement, but AOC hesitated. Her team pushed for a press conference, and against her better judgment, she agreed. The event was set for noon at a community center in the Bronx, a place she'd once rallied crowds with promises of justice and change. Now it felt like walking into a lion's den. The press conference was a circus. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded the podium, and the room buzzed with anticipation. AOC stepped forward. Her usual fire dimmed, her hands gripping the lectern for stability. "These attacks on me are politically motivated," she began, her voice unsteady. "The leaks, the documents, they're being twisted to smear my name because I fight for working people." The words sounded hollow even to her. Reporters fired questions like bullets. "What about the hotel receipts?" one demanded. "Are the emails fake?" another shouted. AOC stumbled, her answers vague, her confidence fraying. "We're looking into it," she said, dodging specifics. "This is about distracting from the real issues." But the room wasn't buying it. Live on Twitter, clips of her faltering responses went viral, each hesitation fueling the narrative that she was hiding something. In Louisiana, Kennedy was wrapping up his event when an aide showed him the live feed of AOC's press conference. He watched for a moment, his expression unreadable. "She's digging her own hole," he said quietly, then turned back to the crowd, shaking hands with a group of veterans. His team admired his focus, while AOC floundered. Kennedy stayed above the fray, letting the leaks and the public's reaction do the talking. His reputation as a senator who prioritized his constituents over political games only grew stronger. A local reporter caught him on his way out asking if he'd respond to AOC's latest claims. Kennedy paused, his eyes twinkling with that trademark wit. "Folks who live by the spotlight shouldn't be surprised when it shows their shadow," he said, then climbed into his car. The quote was everywhere by nightfall, trending alongside #Kennedy was right. AOC's press conference had been a disaster, and she knew it. Back in her office, she slumped in her chair, the weight of the day crushing her. Her team was in chaos, some arguing for a stronger denial, others urging her to come clean. She scrolled through her phone, the flood of notifications overwhelming. A message from her father stood out, simple but piercing. "Alexandria, you know what's right. Don't let pride make the choice for you." She closed her eyes, his words cutting through the noise. Her father had always been her anchor, a man who'd taught her to fight for the voiceless, not for fame. But now she felt like she was drowning in her own narrative, the one she'd built with fiery speeches and viral moments. The leaks didn't stop. By evening, a third wave hit, a series of emails between AOC's campaign staff discussing how to maximize her attacks on Kennedy for fundraising. One email read, "The donors love the drama. Keep pushing the Kennedy angle, it's gold." The messages were cold, calculated, and damning. News networks ran them on a loop, with anchors shaking their heads. "This suggests a deliberate strategy," one commentator said, using Senator Kennedy as a punching bag to fill campaign coffers. The backlash was brutal. Even progressive outlets, usually her allies, ran cautious headlines. "AOC faces growing questions over campaign tactics." On social media, her supporters were split. Some defended her, others felt betrayed, their trust shaken by the growing evidence. AOC's apartment was a refuge, but not tonight. She sat on her couch, the TV muted, but still flashing her face next to the leaked emails. Her phone buzzed with a call from her father. She answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Dad, I don't know how to fix this." His response was gentle but firm. "You start by being honest, Alexandria. Not just with the world, but with yourself." She hung up, tears stinging her eyes. She thought of Kennedy, his steady demeanor, his refusal to stoop to her level. He wasn't fighting her with insults or grandstanding, he was letting the truth carve its own path. And that truth was relentless. In Washington, Kennedy was at a quiet dinner with his staff, discussing plans for a new education initiative in Louisiana. The AOC story was background noise, but his aides couldn't resist checking their phones. "The emails are everywhere," one said, showing him the latest headlines. Kennedy nodded, his expression calm. "When you build a house on sand, it doesn't take much to bring it down," he said, sipping his coffee. His team knew what he meant. AOC's accusations had been bold, but her foundation was shaky, and the leaks were exposing it. Kennedy didn't need to push. The truth was doing the work for him. By midnight, New York was buzzing with rumors of more leaks to come. AOC's team was in full damage control mode, but morale was crumbling. Some aides were already distancing themselves, quietly updating their resumes. AOC sat alone, staring at a photo of her father from years ago, his arm around her at a community event. She'd been so proud then, so sure of her purpose. Now, she felt lost in a storm of her own making. The hashtags #TSDWE, scandal and Kennedy was right trended relentlessly, each one a reminder of the hole she'd dug. Her father's words echoed again, a quiet plea to choose truth over pride. But the next leak was coming, and AOC knew it could be the one to break her. The clock ticked louder. and the truth was closing in faster than she could run. The dawn broke over New York City with a muted glow, the kind that promised rain but held back, leaving the air heavy with anticipation. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known to the world as AOC, sat alone in her queen's apartment, the faint hum of the city outside drowned out by the chaos in her mind. The redistricting map, threatening her 14th congressional district seat, was still a proposal, its final stages looming, but the real storm was the one she'd unleashed. Her accusations against Senator John Neely Kennedy, blaming him for orchestrating the map to silence her, had backfired spectacularly. Leaked videos and documents showing her laughing about using a tax on Kennedy to boost donations and questionable campaign spending had turned her into the story. Social media was a battlefield with hashtags like #AOC exposed and #follow the money trending alongside clips of her faltering press conference. Her phone, once a lifeline of support, now buzzed with messages of doubt, even from allies. AOC stared at a blank document on her laptop, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat as she wrestled with what to say next. Her father's voice lingered in her thoughts, his words from their last call cutting deeper than any headline. "Alexandria, truth is the only way out." He'd said, his tone heavy with love and worry. She'd hung up without responding, but his message clung to her, a reminder of the values he'd instilled: integrity over ambition, service over spotlight. The leaks had painted a damning picture, emails plotting to maximize her attacks on Kennedy for fundraising receipts, showing campaign funds spent on luxury expenses, and now whispers of a final devastating leak on the horizon. AOC's team was in disarray, some urging her to fight back, others begging her to come clean. She felt the walls closing in each news cycle, tightening the vice. Her father's voicemail played again in her mind, a beacon in the fog. You can't run from the truth forever. In Louisiana, Senator John Neely Kennedy was far from the media storm, speaking at a small church in Shreveport. The pews were filled with families, their faces warm with trust, as Kennedy shared plans for community development. His voice, steady and laced with that familiar Southern charm, carried a sincerity that resonated. When a reporter slipped in asking about AOC's latest press conference, Kennedy's eyes softened. "I'm focused on the folks here," he said, gesturing to the congregation. "The truth is doing its work in New York. Doesn't need me to push it along." The crowd nodded their faith in him, unshaken. Kennedy's aides marveled at his restraint. He didn't need to attack AOC to win. His commitment to integrity was enough. Back in his office, a stack of letters from constituents waited, each one a reminder of why he served. The drama in New York was a distant hum, but Kennedy knew the truth was about to speak louder. By midday, the storm broke. A major national news network received an anonymous package, a USB drive labeled "The Full Story." Inside were audio recordings, detailed financial records, and a bombshell, a private Zoom call where AOC told campaign strategists Kennedy's an easy target. "The more I hit him, the more the base donates. It's a win-win." The clip was brutal, her tone casual, almost gleeful, as she dismissed concerns about ethics. "No one's checking the fine print," she'd said, laughing. The network aired the story that evening, the anchor's voice grave. "Tonight, we uncover new evidence raising serious questions about Representative Ocasio-Cortez's campaign practices," she began, as images of bank statements and email threads flashed across the screen. The reaction was instant. Social media erupted with #AOCTruth and #KennedyVindicated, while even progressive commentators struggled to defend her. "This isn't just a misstep," one analyst said. "This looks like a calculated strategy, and it's hard to unsee." AOC watched the broadcast from her apartment, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. The Zoom clip played on a loop, her own words slicing through her. She remembered that call, the late-night strategy session, the rush of feeling untouchable. Now it was a trap she'd set for herself. Her team called an emergency meeting, but half the staff didn't show their silence louder than any argument. Messages from supporters dwindled, replaced by demands for accountability. A text from her father arrived. "Alexandria, it's not too late. Face the truth." She didn't reply, but his words echoed, mingling with Kennedy's calm warning. The truth will speak for itself. She felt the weight of her choices, each one a brick in the wall, now crumbling around her. The next morning, AOC's office was eerily quiet, the usual buzz replaced by a tense hush. Reporters still camped outside, but the energy had shifted, less frenzy, more judgment. She knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Her team drafted a statement, but it felt hollow, full of deflections. AOC stared at the words, then pushed the laptop away. "No more spin," she said, her voice low. "I need to do this right." Her aides exchanged glances, unsure what she meant. She picked up her phone and called her father. "Dad, I'm scared," she admitted, tears welling. His voice was steady like a lighthouse in a storm. "Fear means you're human, Alexandria. But truth means you're free. You know what to do." She hung up, a resolve forming in her chest, fragile but real. That afternoon, AOC announced a press conference at a community center in the Bronx, the same place she'd launched her first campaign, with dreams of change. The room was packed, cameras rolling the air, thick with expectation. She stepped to the podium, no notes, no prepared speech. Her hands shook, but her eyes were clear. "I've spent the last week blaming others for my troubles," she began, her voice raw. "I pointed fingers at Senator Kennedy, said things that weren't fair, and let pride cloud my judgment. The truth is, I've made mistakes. I've used my platform to chase attention instead of focusing on service. I've let down the people who believed in me." The room was silent, cameras capturing every word. "My father taught me to fight for what's right, and I strayed from that. Today, I'm choosing to start over, to be honest, even if it costs me." The confession hit like a thunderbolt. Reporters scribbled furiously, social media buzzing with clips of her speech. Some praised her courage, others questioned her timing, but the tone was different now, less venom, more introspection. In Louisiana, Kennedy was at a school opening when an aide showed him the footage. He watched in silence, then nodded. "That took guts," he said quietly. "If she means it, that's a start." Later, at a press gaggle, reporters asked for his reaction. Kennedy's response was measured, his voice warm but firm. "Admitting you're wrong is hard, especially in this business. I respect anyone who chooses truth over pride. The rest is up to her." His words carried no triumph, only a quiet call for accountability, earning nods from even skeptical journalists. AOC's father watched her press conference from the Bronx, proud she chose truth despite her stumble. His words lifted her as she faced an uncertain future, though a flicker of peace returned. Online, our AOC truth trended with #Kennedy Vindicated, showing the public was listening. In Washington, Kennedy focused on his work, reminded his aide that the truth always finds a way. The frenzy faded, but the lesson endured. Leadership is integrity, not headlines. AOC still faced mistrust and redistricting battles, yet her reckoning offered a chance to begin again. Kennedy's quiet strength showed truth shines on its own. For AOC and all watching, the message was clear: fear fades, regret lasts, and only truth can set you free.